Welcome everybody. We're going to switch to English now. Hope that's okay. My Portuguese is not so great. My business Portuguese is even worse. So I'm really the warm-up act for all the other speakers that are coming after me. You've got some amazing speakers speaking later on. I'd like to highlight Michael Coates here sitting in the front, the Chief Information Security Officer of Twitter, coming here from Silicon Valley. Very honored to have him here. I've invited him to join me on this trip, and I'm very happy that he agreed. So stay tuned for his talk. He's the man in charge of protecting Twitter against all their cyber attacks and the attacks on their users, and dealing with the White House and the US government and everything that Twitter has to do. So that's going to be fascinating. And all the other speakers as well. So really, this is just a warm-up act for you. So my name is Yoav Leitersdorf. I'm a fund manager. I manage a venture capital fund. I've been doing this for 10 years. Just about to launch our third fund, YLV3, which is a $75 million fund. We're grateful to BRAINVEST, our partner. So thank you first for throwing this event this morning and having us, hosting us here, but also thank you for being our partner in fundraising. And we're happy to say that several of BRAINVEST's clients are going to be investors in our next fund and have been investors in previous funds. So we have a great relationship with BRAINVEST, and thank you very much. So I'll tell you a little bit about the world that that I'm involved in. Just maybe two words is to say that our strategy is to invest in startups that originate in Israel. We take them to the US, we commercialize them, we create big or bigger companies out of them, and eventually we end up selling them in the US after a few years. Our chief sector is cybersecurity, which is what you see all over here. And that's an area we've been investing very deeply for the last 7 years. And so I think much of my presentation is going to talk about that, but we'll also talk about other sectors that we're investors in. So just a little bit about our strategy so you have some context. These are the happy Israeli entrepreneurs with their smiling faces. We invest in them. Typically about $3 million at seed stage, and we typically take up the entire round. We don't do much syndication, but we immediately bring them over to the US, mostly Silicon Valley, which is where I'm based. I have a lot of people working for me in Israel, 7 people, but I'm based in the Valley. We bring them over and we commercialize them, create companies out of them. So let's first talk a little bit about Israel, because I know quite a few of you in the audience are interested or have some dealings with Israel. Well, Israel is considered a startup nation. It is the number 2 producer in the world of startups. So in 2015, we had 1,400 new Israeli startups. This is, again, second only to the US, and that's extraordinary because Israel is a tiny place. It's only 8 million people, but it has the highest concentration of engineers in the world, trained by the army, mostly the intelligence units, and lots of experience with US companies and known for innovation. Just in terms of dollars and cents, the investment per capita in Israel is highest in the world at $423 per capita. That's a very large number. The US is at $186. Europe is at $16. I don't know what Brazil is, but Israel is 3 times the US and 25 times Europe. In terms of early stage investments, these are seed stage investments and Series A investments. We have about $1.1 billion a year, at least last year, which was 364 companies being seeded and invested in the A rounds. In terms of exits, last year we had $10 billion worth of exits out of Israel, 93 M&A deals, 3 IPOs. And we find, we've been doing this for 10 years, we find investing in Israeli startups is capital efficient, attractive valuations, and there's a really strong link between Israel and the US. So we can find follow-on financing for these companies, we can sell these companies in the US, we can even IPO these companies on NASDAQ. So there's a strong connection there. This is just a little bit about our differentiation in our marketplace. Essentially, we're seen as the guys who are helping these Israeli entrepreneurs make it in the US. We've got a lot of the relationships. For example, in cybersecurity, we know a lot of the potential customers of these startups, right? So a lot of these startups are doing security. Well, we know the likes of Michael, who's the CISO of Twitter. We know, a lot of other CISOs and a lot of other potential customers for our companies, and that's really our value add, is we immediately create a market for them in the US, and that's why they come to us. Now, we don't just do security, but security is now, for the next fund, is about 80% of what we expect to invest, because it's a market that is huge and growing. We'll talk more about that. But we're also investing in enterprise software, which is a third of $1 trillion market. We see some pockets of enterprise software that are still very interesting, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. We're also looking at investments in drone technologies. Israel happens to be the #1 exporter in the world of military drones, so there's a lot of that knowledge that spills over to civilian technologies that we're interested in. Autonomous vehicle technologies, you all know about Uber self-driving cars, Waymo, Google self-driving cars, Tesla self-driving features, but there's lots of issues in autonomous vehicles still, so there's a lot of technology that's being created. We're looking at that. And VR, AR is virtual reality, augmented reality. That's a sector that we think has really matured. Last year we saw the release of HTC Vive, which we believe is finally the virtual reality experience that we've all been waiting for. Augmented reality is even bigger than virtual reality by a big multiple. That's when you have typically glasses that have an overlay image on top of what you're seeing in the real world. So there's lots of applications in manufacturing, medical, training, just lots of applications there. Big markets, right, in terms of what the analysts are predicting, and we'll see whether those pan out. As a firm, we've looked at over 100 companies in these three sectors. We haven't made a single deal yet, haven't made a single investment yet, because we're very cautious about these sectors. We want to see something really amazing. So let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity. This is, sometimes I call it the gift that keeps on giving, even though, it's quite sad because this market is all created by adversaries, by bad guys, people who are trying to hack our accounts, our Twitter accounts, our money in our banks, our identities. It's terrible, but it has spawned a huge market that we end up capitalizing on, because we have the relationships with the Israeli entrepreneurial community that comes up with these great solutions. Then we have the relationships in Silicon Valley and the US in general for commercializing these solutions and selling these solutions. So in 3 years, this is going to be a $170 billion a year market. Today, it's about $100 billion a year. And what I'm counting in that market is basically all the revenues that are generated by companies that are providing software, hardware, services, solutions to the end customers. The end customers are typically large enterprises, medium-sized enterprises, and some consumers and SMBs. So that's the total revenue of that market. This market has generated 600 exits in the last 16 years, or since 2000. That's a big number of exits. There are not many sectors that have this many exits. We've had some of those ourselves. Lots of interesting trends in cybersecurity. Enterprises are still shifting to the cloud. I'm sure you see this a lot in Brazil. Even in the US, most data centers are still on premise, and there's still a transition to the cloud. It's not like everything is in public cloud based or even hybrid cloud. There's still a lot of transition. In that transition, a lot of security breaks. There's basically a lot of security threats that originate there, and so we find a lot of companies that are protecting this transition to the cloud. Another big area is IoT security. We've talked about that here in Brazil as well in the last few days. You all heard of Internet of Things, all of these things that are coming online, coming onto the internet, getting IP addresses, and having very, very little security. And so we see a lot of solutions there. I want to mention greenfield opportunities. What we call in our firm, we call that cybersecurity for X. X is usually a new emerging sector. For example, autonomous driving, self-driving cars, right? That's a new subsector or a new sector, something new that's emerging. What happens typically very shortly after a sector like that emerges is people start thinking about cybersecurity. Okay, well, what if somebody hacks the cars and they start crashing into each other and there's chaos? And so we actually made an investment in a company that solves that problem. Here are some cybersecurity transactions. This slide was done a couple months ago, but we can see some notable acquisitions over here. I hope you guys can see it from the back. There's the transaction here of Avast AVG, which is interesting. So one of our venture advisors in our firm is Gary Kovacs, who was the CEO of AVG. He sold that company to Avast for $1.4 billion last September, October. AVG and Avast together are the #1 player in the world for consumer cybersecurity, right? Probably a lot of your, the antivirus that runs in many of your PCs is either AVG or Avast. Well, now that's one company. Another notable transaction is the acquisition of Blue Coat by Symantec. There's a very charismatic gentleman by the name of Greg Clark who heads up Blue Coat, and through this transaction became the CEO of Symantec. Right, so Symantec acquired Blue Coat. He, as the acquiree, became the CEO of the parent, right, of the big company here. He's an amazing guy. He's doing a lot of M&A in the sector. He's already bought 3 companies since he became the CEO, 3 big companies. And so it's very exciting. Cisco has been a huge player in cybersecurity, doing lots of acquisitions. IBM as well. IBM is actually the largest cybersecurity vendor in the world. So IBM Security actually has the largest revenues in the world of any cybersecurity software company. So that's kind of interesting, that a division of IBM is the largest cybersecurity player. FireEye obviously is interesting. It was a poster child of cybersecurity, and the stock was up at I don't know, $25 a share about 18 months ago. Actually today it's much lower than that. It sort of crashed in a way, and so we all learned from the emergence of FireEye and how great it was in the heyday and all the right things that it did, but then also the failure of the company. It's a great case study. We study that a lot. And here are some financings up here. You see that, you know, these companies are generating, are raising significant amounts of money. Shape Security, $40 million. Sky High is an interesting company, $40 million round. This is a company that was competing with one of our old portfolio companies that we sold last November to another company called Proofpoint. Zimperium is Israeli, endpoint security, $30 million round. Light Cyber raised $25 million, but was actually just acquired very recently by Palo Alto Networks. So you can see very healthy rounds here. I think these are all from 2016. We looked at 115 founding teams of cybersecurity companies during 2016, right? So that's an average of 1 every 3 calendar days, right? That includes weekends. So we've definitely seen a lot of companies in cybersecurity. Every January, Wild Ventures publishes a report called State of the Cyber Nation. Basically, that's a report that covers cybersecurity coming out of Israel. Israel, by the way, is, as you would probably guess, the second #2 market in the world for generating cybersecurity companies, right? So it's not as important as the US, but it's a very close second. And you can see the increase in funding year over year. So 2016 compared with 2015, we've seen 23% more funding. 83 new cybersecurity companies formed in 2016 in Israel. 36% of the companies that were started in 2016, just started in 2016, received funding in 2016. This is a very high percentage. You know, typically, and actually in most other sectors, you'll see much lower percentages, right? Maybe 5–10% of startups get funded in the year that they were formed. This is extremely high. 1/3 of all companies received money. So that also tells you that our market is quite competitive, right? And so as a firm, there's a lot of things that we need to do in order to win the deals. Be there very early, bond with the entrepreneurs, create a great reputation for ourselves. So it's a competitive market. So now I'm just going to, I was asked to highlight a few of our portfolio companies to give you some color as to what cybersecurity startups are like. So FireLayers is one of our favorite stories. This is a company that makes cloud applications secure, right? So I talked earlier about enterprises' migration to the cloud, right? So enterprises adopt Salesforce, or they adopt Google Drive or Office 365. Any one of those SaaS or cloud platforms. As soon as you do that as an enterprise, you've just opened yourself to a whole world of potential hacking. Okay, your attack surface has just gone 10x. And so you need protection for that. And FireLayers is a company that was formed 3.5 years ago to protect to protect those cloud deployments. And so we had a great time with this company over 3 years, growing the company. We led the seed round, then we ended up also leading the A round. So we started with about a 25% stake of the company, and after leading the A round and doing some more financing, we ended up with 47% of the companies, which is quite high. It's almost control, and we don't like control, so we're gonna just shy of 50%. And then we sold it 5 months ago. So that 5 months ago to Proofpoint for $60 million. Now this was kind of an unexpected acquisition. We actually had 4 different companies bidding for FireLayers, and the other 3 were companies that we initially expected would be potential buyers of this business. We never expected that Proofpoint would be the acquirer. Proofpoint is a protector of email. So I'm sure they have very large market penetration in Brazil, I have no doubt. They're protecting your email from malicious threats. And so what does an email company or email security company do? You know, why are they buying a cloud security company? Well, this was their expansion strategy. By now we already know, because it's all public information, they're really aggressively going into cloud protection, cloud security. FireLayers was their way to get in. And since then, so FireLayers has a big R&D center in Israel. When they were acquired, I think they had 30 people or 25 people working in Israel. They've already doubled it, right? So they've basically had the FireLayers founders hire a whole bunch of more engineers, and now Israel is really a center of excellence for Proofpoint, where all the cloud security software is being developed. Karamba Security is another example from our portfolio. This is an existing portfolio company. We did not sell this one yet. This one is protecting the automotive sector. It's protecting cars, connected cars, autonomous vehicles from cyber attacks. And they have a unique technology that nobody before them had, which has to do with protecting the ECUs. Those are the little computers in the car. We call it an endpoint approach versus a network-based approach, which is what their competitors had. And this company is just growing like wildfire. We invested in them a year ago at a relatively modest valuation. They already went through a Series A round about 6 months ago, and they signed a term sheet for a Series B round, which will be closed in the next couple of weeks and announced very soon. One of our co-investors there is Fontinellis, which is the VC of Bill Ford, who is the chairman and former CEO of Ford Motor Company. And you'll see in 2 weeks we're going to announce this current round, which actually has lots of automotive companies as investors in the round, which gives the company a lot of validation. So this has been a great market opportunity. We're very excited about this company. Twistlock is another exciting company out of our current portfolio. And what they're doing is something that is very hard to explain, but at the same time, very. I always have challenges explaining what these guys are doing. But it's what they're doing is they're securing virtual containers, Docker. I don't know if any of you have heard of Docker, but essentially there's a big move in the data center from virtual machines, what VMware and others were doing, to virtual containers, which is what Docker and others are doing. It's basically a much more efficient way to run your data center. Okay, you can look this up online. The issue with Docker and these virtual containers is that they really have no security built in. Docker is a wonderful open source platform. There's like 2 security features in Docker, and so everything else is wide open. And so these entrepreneurs, 2 years ago, they came to us with an idea to secure Docker. Back then, Docker was nothing really, or we could basically look at the number of downloads of the Docker platform. We could look at how many people on LinkedIn put Docker in their resume, but it was just beginning to accelerate, and we thought this is probably going to be an interesting market. So we backed these guys. By now, they've really proved their model. So last year, in 2016, they started with 0 revenues because they were just starting out. By the end of the year, they had well into the 7 figures of revenues and bookings. We did an A round with 1011 Ventures, or really the cybersecurity arm of KKR, with Rally Ventures, with EMC Ventures, and these guys are actually now closing their B round already, which values the company, I don't know, 14 times or so what we invested a couple of years ago. So, you know, this is really fast moving as well in the security sector. Hexadite is another company in our current portfolio. Hexadite is based in Boston. By the way, all of our companies are headquartered in the US with R&D in Israel. Hexadite, what they do is they help banks, large enterprises, government bodies handle the massive number of security alerts that they're getting every day, right? So if you're a big bank, like a Citi or Bank of America, or even a medium-sized bank, you're seeing thousands of security alerts every week. And it's impossible for your team to handle all these security alerts, to investigate them, and to remediate them. It gets really hard. And so what Hexadite does is they have software that automates the investigation and remediation of security incidents. That's very helpful to large organizations. They've had great revenue traction, great customers like Nuance that have gone public with a case study, like Verizon, lots of interesting customers in the US. Here again, the follow-on investors or co-investors are here, 1011 Ventures again from KKR, and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, which has been a great partner, great channel partner, taking Hexadite to all of their customers. It's been a great experience. This company is in our portfolio. We're having a great time with them and helping them grow. So enterprise software I mentioned earlier, right? It's a third of $1 trillion market. It's massive. It's growing modestly at 6% year over year. And there are some areas within enterprise software, I'm talking outside of security, that are interesting for us. So SaaS, software as a service, is still very interesting. We're looking for unique opportunities there. We're looking for intellectual property within SaaS. AI, artificial intelligence, we're looking a lot at that. There's lots of interesting applications, mostly coming out of Israel. DevOps means the integration of development and IT operations in the enterprise. That's a movement that's been happening for the last 5 years, and there's still a lot of interesting opportunities there. We're looking for innovations in the data center, right? I mentioned virtual containers earlier, so anything that helps improve the efficiency of the database, of the data center, the efficiency of servers in general. This is all stuff that we're interested in. So we had a company in enterprise software that we sold to CA recently, around the same time that we sold FireLayer, so a few months ago. This is a company that does performance testing, load testing, right? So one of their customers, they have a few customers in Brazil. One of them is Walmart Brazil. So specifically the online presence of Walmart Brazil, so walmart.com.br is a website that gets a lot of traffic, right? But as you approach Christmas season or the holiday season, traffic goes 10x, 15x, 20x, multiplies. There's so much more traffic. How does Walmart Brazil handle all this traffic? Well, BlazeMeter helps Walmart Brazil and 20,000 other customers prepare for such events, for spikes in traffic by doing performance testing when, in other times of the year when there's a lot less load. So we invested in this company in 2011. We started with about a 31% stake. We invested over a 5-year period, more and more capital as the company grew. We ended up with about 42-43% stake in the company. So when we eventually sold it to CA, we were a very large shareholder and were able to capitalize on the investment. That was a very successful exit for us in enterprise software. Upstream Commerce is also another company in enterprise software category. It's still in our portfolio. It's a profitable company based in New York, doing retail pricing, intelligence, and optimization for retailers. So they're going after the 300 largest retailers in the U.S. They're very U.S. focused. They got customers like JCPenney, Staples, Toys R Us, and they also have some manufacturer customers like GoPro, for example, or even like Microsoft that manufactures software. And what they're doing is they're helping all these retailers and manufacturers price their products, price it based on what's happening at the competition, looking at every competitor's prices, predicting prices into the future, pricing analytics, looking at inventory levels and various economic attributes of every product. It's a very interesting company. It's doing very well. It's a SaaS business. It's got proprietary technology. It's still in our portfolio. It's growing, doing very well. These are some of the other sectors that we're looking at. So perhaps this might be interesting for you. So here's autonomous vehicles, right? And you guys, I'm sure you're reading all the news about all the latest and greatest that's coming out of Silicon Valley and Detroit and other parts of the world in autonomous vehicles. Well, there's still a lot of issues, lots and lots of issues. There's lots of safety issues. It's not like cars are driving themselves right now, really anywhere in the world. There's still lots of issues. There's safety issues and there's regulatory issues. Lots of problems, challenges. And so entrepreneurs in Israel that, some of them might have been doing cybersecurity a couple years ago, but have channeled their talents, which are similar talents, are now doing autonomous vehicle solutions. So you've got machine learning, artificial intelligence, computer vision, lots of talents that they have from elsewhere, maybe from the army, or maybe from the intelligence units there. They're applying it to this sector, and we're very interested. So we're listening, we're seeing these business plans and these ideas, and we might fund a company in this area. Drones. That's another area of interest. We especially are intrigued by autonomous flights, so drones that are not being controlled by remote, but are controlling themselves. Swarms of drones, so like teams of 20, 30, 40, 50 drones working on something at the same time, being coordinated. So lots of business applications. We see a lot of it in utilities, for example, examining towers and sites, and a lot in construction. So there's actually a lot of interesting activity there. We're looking for enabling technologies that are helping this sector evolve. And in terms of virtual reality, augmented reality, like I said, we were very excited by the HTC Vive that came out last year. We think it's the best headset. And then there's lots of applications that have been coming out. There's a lot of augmented reality, lots of new devices there by Microsoft and others. And so we're interested in what could improve the experience, what could bring business applications to VR, AR. It's an area that we're looking at. So just on drones, focusing in a little bit on that, we looked at 24 teams in Israel in 2016 doing drone businesses. We haven't invested in any of them. We saw a lot of drone security companies, so companies that are helping drones not get hacked as they're flying around. And then the reverse, folks that have facilities that don't want drones coming in, right? So blocking, keeping the drones out. That's actually a very, very challenging problem, very tough problem to solve. You know that these three guys over here are investing billions in drones, certainly Amazon. So that's very interesting. And here are some funding rounds. There hasn't really been a lot of M&A in drones yet, but here are some interesting funding rounds. We know a lot of these companies. Drone Deploy, great company, raised $20 million. Aerobotics is an Israeli company, raised $26 million in late 2016. Aerobotics is all about commercial applications of drones, really helping enterprises use drones. It's Dronomy, another interesting company. This is a very interesting space. We're following it. It's still very young. There's hardly any M&A, right? So for an investor, it's quite risky from a return perspective, but it's an area to watch. We might make an investment in this area. Autonomous vehicles back here, just looking at some deals. So we've looked at 12 founding teams in autonomous vehicles in 2016. There has already been M&A activity. I'll tell you something that I'm not sure you've thought about or if you've done the math, but an autonomous vehicle engineer, a self-driving car engineer, somebody who knows, who's deep into this technology, which involves AI, computer vision, and other technologies, is worth over $10 million, just single engineer. Each engineer, $10 million. And we've computed this from recent exits. So Uber bought Otto, and now we know both those companies very, very well, for about 1% of Uber at the time, which was almost $700 million. Basically, Otto was 70 engineers, no revenues. They had a prototype of a product. We've seen the product. We've been in the product. It's basically a self-driving truck. And at a very embryonic stage of the company, I think the company was only 7 or 8 months old. It was sold for almost $700 million to Uber. So, you know, that's $10 million per engineer. But you can look at Mobileye. That was sold to Intel about 2 or 3 weeks ago for over $15 billion. You could do the math, what those engineers are worth. Now, there you had a lot of revenues and you had a real business. But these engineers are going for, look, GM bought Cruise for $1 billion, another company that didn't have revenues, hardly had a product, right? Other interesting transactions here. Samsung's acquisition of Harman for $8 billion, which is related. But, I mean, the multiples just on talent in this business are absolutely crazy, right? I'm not even look, multiples on revenues, right? So Mobileye had 350 million or so in revenue, something like that neighborhood. They were sold for over $15 billion. The multiples on their revenues were over 50, right? 50x. So it's just insane. It's a market that we should certainly look at. Here are some interesting companies that have raised funding rounds. Autonomo is an Israeli company that we like very much. We're not in it, but it's a beautiful company. You might want to look it up. I won't tell you now what they do, but it's an interesting one to look at. So certainly we can't ignore this sector. We're looking at it. Still haven't made any investment, but our next fund, YLV3, will likely, if I had to bet on it, I would say we'd probably have one company in this sector. So as a firm, we publish a lot of thought leadership. I told you about the cybersecurity report that we're putting out every January, but we also have done one on drones that became very popular. We've only been looking at drones for 6 months, but we've amassed some knowledge. We've published it on TechCrunch. This has been shared thousands of times, and this is about the drone ecosystem in Israel. So if you're interested, you can look it up on TechCrunch. And on VentureBee, we did something else also a few months ago, is we mapped the Israeli autonomous vehicle startup ecosystem. You'd be surprised, but there's already like 50 different companies that are involved in autonomous vehicle technologies. We also included our company Karamba Security here that's doing security for autonomous vehicles. So we kind of see one of our security companies as also being in this sector as well. This is just some of our relationships in Silicon Valley. We like to show this. Our entrepreneurs are, they come to us for this, right? They come, it's not just the money, money you can get anywhere. There's, I think the industry is flooded with cash right now. Entrepreneurs can always raise funding, but they come to us because of our relationships with co-investors, with customers for our portfolio companies, for potential acquirers that we know because they have either bought companies from us or tried to buy companies for us. We have a lot of relationships with PR, and we spend a lot of time on recruiting. That's it. I can, I guess, maybe take a couple questions if anybody has any. Later. Okay. Thank you very much.